Hell's Angel thought a man was stealing his bike. What he discovered next left him speechless. The chrome was still warm from the ride when Dalton saw him. A thin figure bent over his Harley in the parking lot behind Murphy's bar, hands moving fast in the dark. Dalton's boots hit gravel before his brain caught up to his body, 30 years of instinct firing like pistons. Nobody touched the bike. Not the '74 shovelhead his brother died on, not the machine he'd rebuilt bolt by bolt with hands that still shook sometimes when he thought about that night in '09. The man's fingers were on the ignition, and Dalton's fist was already clenched when the stranger turned. Not toward him, toward the streetlight. And in that yellow wash of sodium glow, Dalton saw the face. Young, maybe 22. The same sharp jaw, the same green eyes his brother wore the last time Dalton saw him breathing. Wait, before the next ride begins. If this story already hit you right in the chest, tell us where you're watching from. To ride with the Brotherhood through the next promise, loss, or redemption, subscribe and join the club. Engines up, back to the road. Dalton stopped 3 feet away, close enough to smell motor oil and something else. Fear, probably, or adrenaline. The kid's hands went up, palms out, but they were shaking. Not the shake of guilt, the shake of something deeper. I wasn't stealing it, the kid said. His voice cracked on the last word. I needed to see it. Dalton didn't move. 30 years wearing the Death's Head patch taught you when to swing and when to wait. The kid wasn't armed, wasn't running, was just standing there like he'd been waiting for this moment his whole life and didn't know whether to be relieved or terrified now that it had arrived. See what? Dalton's voice came out rough. 2 whiskeys and a long day on the road did that. The kid's eyes went to the bike, not like a thief looking at merchandise.
Like a pilgrim looking at a shrine. The shovelhead, he said. The one my dad told me about. The words landed like a punch Dalton didn't see coming. He took a step back, hand instinctively going to his chest, where the patch sat heavy over his heart. The parking lot spun for just a second, gravel and streetlight, and the ghost of a memory that never quite left him alone. Your dad, Dalton repeated. Not a question, a confirmation of something he already knew but couldn't quite believe. The kid nodded, reached slowly into his jacket pocket. Dalton's hand moved to his belt on instinct, but the kid pulled out something small, a photograph, old, creased, the kind of thing that had been folded and unfolded 1,000 times. Dalton took it. His hands were shaking now too. The photo showed 2 men, young, leaning against this exact bike, both wearing cuts with no patches yet, prospects, in the days before they earned their place. Dalton recognized himself immediately, despite the 20 pounds and 15 years that separated him from that version. And next to him, arms slung over Dalton's shoulders, grinning like the world was his and the road would last forever. Marcus, Dalton whispered. You knew him? Not a question. The kid's voice was thick. You were there. Dalton handed back the photo, couldn't look at it anymore. The bike suddenly felt heavier behind him, like Marcus's ghost had climbed on the back seat and was waiting for a ride that would never come. I was there, Dalton said, the night he died. The kid flinched like he'd been hit. His jaw worked, chewing words he couldn't quite get out. Finally, he never told me about you. My mom, she didn't talk about that part of his life, said it was over before I was born, but I found the photo in his things after she... He stopped, started again, after she passed, 3 months ago. And then I spent the last 3 months looking for you.
A car passed on the main road, headlights washing over them both for a moment before darkness settled again. Somewhere in the distance, a train horn moaned. Murphy's door opened behind them, spilling light and laughter and the smell of fried food into the night. Someone shouted something. The door closed. The world kept turning, like it always did, indifferent to the weight of what was happening in this parking lot. Why? Dalton asked. Why look for me? The kid met his eyes. There was Marcus in them. That same stubborn set, that same refusal to look away from hard things. Because I need to know what happened, the kid said. I need to know who he was. My mom told me one story, but she loved him, so everything was soft, edited. I need the real version, the one that explains why he had this photo, why he never came back to us, why he... The kid's voice cracked again. Why he chose a bike over a son. And there it was, the question Dalton had been waiting for. The one he'd asked himself 10,000 times on 10,000 miles of highway, trying to outrun the answer. He didn't choose the bike, Dalton said quietly. He never got the choice. The kid's face hardened. That's what everyone says. He didn't choose to leave. But he rode, didn't he?
He put on that jacket and went out and never came back. That's a choice. Dalton looked at the shovelhead, ran his hand over the tank where Marcus's blood had stained the metal 15 years ago. He'd repainted it 7 times trying to cover that memory, but he could still see it sometimes in the right light. Or maybe it was just his brain refusing to let him forget. "You want the real story?" Dalton asked. "I drove 400 miles to hear it." Dalton reached into his own pocket, pulled out his keys, looked at the bike, then back at the kid. "Not here," he said. "If you want to know who your father was, you need to see where he rode. Get on." The kid stared at him. "What?" "The bike. Get on."
There's a place we need to go. A place I haven't been in 15 years. But if you want the truth, that's where it lives. Dalton swung his leg over the shovelhead, felt the familiar weight settle around him. The engine turned over on the second kick, that deep Harley rumble that was equal parts music and heartbeat. The kid hesitated. His hand went to the passenger seat, fingers hovering over the worn leather. "He sat here," the kid said. It wasn't a question. "Last time, yeah," Dalton said. "The night everything changed. You coming or not?" The kid climbed on. His hands gripped the rails behind the seat, tentative at first, then tighter as Dalton gave it throttle and the shovelhead growled forward. They pulled out of the parking lot, onto the county road that ran like a black river through farmland and memory. The wind hit them both, cold and clean, carrying away everything except the moment. Dalton didn't look back. Couldn't, because if he did, he'd see Marcus sitting where this kid sat, young and alive and laughing about something stupid, and that ghost was too heavy to carry tonight. They rode for 20 minutes in silence. The road unwound beneath them, familiar as breathing. Dalton had run this stretch 1,000 times, but never with a passenger. Never since Marcus. The kid didn't say anything, just held on and let the ride speak for itself. That was good. That meant he understood, at least a little bit, what the bike meant, what the road meant. You couldn't explain it to someone who didn't feel it. The way the engine vibration climbed up through your body until you weren't sure where you ended and the machine began. The way the wind stripped away everything except what mattered. Dalton took a left onto a dirt road. Gravel pinged against the pipes. The shovelhead's headlight cut a tunnel through the darkness, illuminating weeds and fence posts, and the rusted skeleton of an old grain silo rising against the stars. Another quarter-mile and Dalton slowed, then stopped. They were at a bridge, old, narrow, the kind of thing the county forgot about when they built the new highway 3 miles south. Wooden planks over a creek that ran low this time of year. On the far side, an open field stretched toward a tree line black against the sky. Dalton killed the engine. The silence was immediate and total, broken only by the tick of cooling metal and the far-off murmur of water over stone. "This is it," Dalton said. He climbed off the bike, stretched legs that had been gripping the machine for too long. The kid followed, looking around like he expected to see something significant. A memorial, maybe. A marker. Something to explain why they'd come here. "This is what?" the kid asked. Dalton walked to the edge of the bridge, looked down at the creek below, shallow and dark. He could see it even now. The way Marcus's bike had gone over. The way metal and body had tumbled through space before gravity claimed them both. "This is where your father died," Dalton said. The kid went very still. His breathing changed, shallow and quick. He came to stand next to Dalton, looked down at the same water. "How?" One word, barely above a whisper. Dalton closed his eyes, opened them. 15 years and it was still right there, fresh as yesterday. "We were riding back from a run," he said, "just the two of us, late. We'd been down in Austin, picking up parts for the club. Marcus was in front, I was behind. We came around the turn maybe doing 60, and there was a dog." "A dog?" "A dog," Dalton confirmed. "Big one. Some farm animal wandered onto the road. Marcus saw it too late. He had a choice, hit it or swerve. He swerved." The kid's hands were fists at his sides. "Over the edge." "Over the edge." His bike went through the railing there. Dalton pointed at the spot where new wood stood out pale against old. They'd fixed it eventually, but he knew exactly where the break had been.
I stopped, went down after him. The bike was totaled. Marcus was underneath it, conscious, talking. Told me to call for help. Told me he was sorry. Told me. Dalton stopped. His throat had closed up. Even after 15 years, this part was hard. What did he tell you? The kid asked. He told me about you, Dalton said. Said he had a son. Said he'd never met you. Said your mother left when she found out what he was, what the club was. Said he'd been trying to figure out how to be in your life without bringing that world to you. Said he was going to quit, going to hang up the cut and go find you both. He had it all planned out, was going to do it after this run, after we got back. The kid made a sound, not quite a sob, not quite a gasp, something in between. He didn't make it back, Dalton continued. Ambulance took 30 minutes to get here. He died before they arrived. Last thing he said was your name. Kept saying it, over and over, like if he said it enough times, he could will himself back to you. Dalton turned to look at the kid. Tears were running down the young man's face, silent and steady in the moonlight. What was my name? The kid asked. What name did he say? Riley, Dalton said. He said Riley. The kid, Riley, put his hands over his face. His shoulders shook. Dalton looked away, giving him privacy to break. You didn't watch a man cry unless he wanted you to. That was the code. That was respect. After a long minute, Riley lowered his hands. His face was wet, but his eyes were steady. Did he suffer? No, Dalton lied. Because some truths didn't help anyone. It was fast. Riley nodded, looked at the bridge, at the water, at the field beyond where his father's blood had soaked into earth that didn't remember and didn't care. Why didn't you come find me? Riley asked. After. Why didn't you tell me this story? Dalton had known this question was coming, had practiced the answer in his head on the ride over.
But now that it was here, the practiced words felt hollow. Because I didn't know how, he admitted. Your mother wanted nothing to do with the club. Marcus told me that. Said she'd made it clear. If he chose the life, he chose it without her and without you. And after he died, I didn't know what to say. Didn't know if showing up would help or hurt. So I did nothing. I rode his bike and I tried to honor his memory, and I told myself that was enough. But it wasn't. I know it wasn't. Riley was quiet for a long time. The creek whispered beneath them. An owl called from the tree line, lonely and distant. He was going to quit, Riley said finally. He was going to come back. He was. Why didn't he quit before? Why did he wait? Dalton considered his words carefully. This was the part where he could lie again, make Marcus sound better than he was, or tell the truth and risk tarnishing the image Riley was building in his head. He chose the truth. Because he was scared, Dalton said. Because quitting meant admitting he'd wasted years on the wrong thing, meant facing what he'd lost, meant being the kind of man who could walk away from brothers and leather and the only family he'd known since he was 17. That's not easy, even when you know it's right, even when you want to. So he kept putting it off. One more run, one more ride, one more season, and then he ran out of time. Riley absorbed this. Dalton could see him working it through, trying to reconcile the father he'd imagined with the flawed human he was learning about. Do you regret it? Riley asked. The life, the club, all of it. Dalton looked at the shovelhead, sitting patient in the moonlight, looked at the death's head on his chest, thought about 30 years of roads and brothers and choices that couldn't be unmade. Every day. And not at all. That's the truth of it, kid. The life gives you things nothing else can. Brotherhood, freedom, a sense of purpose.
And it takes things nothing should. Time, people, pieces of yourself you don't get back. Marcus understood that. He just understood too late. Riley walked to the bike, put his hand on the tank. His fingers traced the paint job, flames and chrome, and the ghost of blood underneath. Can I ask you something? Riley said. Anything. Why did you rebuild his bike? Why not just let it go?
Dalton came to stand next to him. They both looked at the shovel head like it was a holy thing. And maybe it was. Maybe the machines we saved were the prayers we couldn't speak. Because he loved it, Dalton said. Because every time I ride it, he's still here, still with me, still alive in the way the engine sounds, and the way the handlebars feel, and the way the wind hits when you open it up on the highway. I couldn't save him, but I could save this. And some days, that feels like enough. Some days it has to be. Riley nodded slowly. His hands stayed on the tank. I understand that, he said. They stood there together. 2 men and a ghost, and a bike that had carried them all through different kinds of darkness. The stars wheeled overhead, indifferent and ancient. The creek kept talking to itself in languages nobody remembered. What do you do? Dalton asked. For work, I mean. Mechanic, Riley said. Custom bikes, mostly. Got a little shop in Dallas. Nothing fancy. Just me and one other guy. But we do good work. Dalton smiled for the first time that night. He'd like that, Marcus. That you ended up with bikes anyway. Yeah. My mom hated it. Said I was trying to be him. Maybe I was. Maybe I am. Riley looked at Dalton. Will you tell me about him? Not just the end. The beginning. The middle. All of it. That'll take a while. I've got time. And you owe me 15 years worth of stories. Dalton couldn't argue with that. He climbed back on the shovel head, felt Riley settle in behind him.
The engine caught on the first kick this time, like it had been listening and wanted to be part of what came next. Where are we going? Riley asked. My place, Dalton said. You're going to need more than one night to hear it all. And I've got photos, letters, things Marcus left in the clubhouse that I've been holding on to. Figured maybe someday someone would want them. Guess that day is today. They pulled back onto the dirt road, onto the county highway, onto the path that led away from the bridge and the ghost and the memory of a man who died trying to get home. The ride back was different than the ride out, lighter somehow, like telling the truth had lifted something heavy off both their shoulders. At a stoplight, Riley leaned forward and spoke over the engine rumble. Thank you, he said, for telling me, for bringing me there. Dalton nodded, didn't trust his voice right then. The light changed. They rode on. Dalton's place was a small house 20 minutes outside town, single story, needed paint, had a garage out back that was bigger than the house itself. They pulled in around midnight, and Dalton killed the engine in the driveway. The sudden silence was almost shocking after hours of engine noise and wind. Inside, the house was what you'd expect from a man who lived alone and worked with his hands. Clean but spare. Furniture that worked but didn't match. Photos on the walls, mostly bikes and brothers. A few landscapes from runs through Montana and Arizona, and the long stretch of Highway 1 up the California coast. Dalton pointed Riley toward the couch, grabbed 2 beers from the fridge. They sat in the dim light of a single lamp, drinking in silence for a moment. You look like him, you know, Dalton said. It's strange, like seeing Marcus at 22 again. Mom said the same thing, said I got nothing from her except the stubbornness. That's usually enough. Dalton took a long pull from his beer, set it down.
You got a girlfriend? Wife? Neither. I focus on the work. Riley smiled a little. Guess I got that from him too. Bikes over people. That's not a choice you want to make, Dalton said. Trust me. The bikes will still be there when you're old. The people won't. Says the man drinking alone on a Wednesday night. Dalton laughed. It felt good. Felt like maybe this night had earned at least one laugh before it was done. Fair point, he admitted. Do as I say, not as I do. They talked through the night. Dalton pulled out the photos, box after box of them, preserved in a plastic tote in his closet. Marcus young and reckless, posing with bikes and brothers. Marcus getting his patch, grinning so wide it looked like his face might split. Marcus at a roadhouse in New Mexico, drunk and happy.
Marcus and Dalton shoulder to shoulder, both younger and harder and more certain than they'd ever be again. Riley absorbed it all like a man dying of thirst who'd finally found water. He asked questions. Dalton answered. Some of the stories were good. Runs through the desert, bonfires under stars, that time they rode from Seattle to San Diego on a dare and made it in 26 hours. Some were harder, fights with other clubs, brothers lost to accidents or addictions or the law. The time Marcus got jumped outside a bar in Phoenix and Dalton drove through the night to help him. The time they both almost got arrested running guns across state lines before they knew better than to take that kind of work. He wasn't perfect, Dalton said, as the sun started to gray the windows. Nobody is. But he was loyal. And he was trying. At the end, he was really trying. That's all anyone can do, Riley said. He looked exhausted. They both were. But it was the good kind of exhaustion, the kind that came from work that mattered. You can crash here, Dalton offered. Got a spare room. Not much, but it's clean. I appreciate it.
They were both standing, ready to end the night, when Riley asked one more question. Can I come back after I go home and sleep and process all this? Can I come back and hear more? Dalton felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been sealed shut for 15 years. Yeah, he said. Yeah, you can come back anytime. Riley left the next morning after coffee and eggs. Dalton walked him to his truck, a beat-up Ford with Dallas plates and a toolbox in the bed. They shook hands, and in that moment, Dalton felt the years compress, felt Marcus's hand in Riley's grip, felt the weight of time and choice and the roads not taken. Drive safe, Dalton said. Always do. Riley climbed in, started the engine, rolled down the window before he pulled away. Hey, Riley called. That bike, the Shovelhead, do you ever think about selling it? Dalton's heart squeezed. Why? Because maybe it shouldn't sit in your garage forever. Maybe it should ride. Maybe someone should give it the miles Marcus never got to. Dalton considered this. Considered what it would mean to let go. To trust this kid, Marcus's kid, with the thing he'd held on to like a lifeboat in dark water. Come back next month, Dalton said. We'll talk about it. Riley grinned. Marcus's grin. The one that said the world was worth fighting for, even when it fought back. Deal, Riley said. He drove away. Dalton stood in the driveway, watching dust rise behind the truck until it turned onto the county road and disappeared. Then he went back inside and sat at his kitchen table with cold coffee and 15 years of silence finally broken. The next month passed slowly. Dalton worked at the shop where he'd worked since leaving the club officially 10 years ago. He still wore the patch, still showed up to meetings, still rode with the brothers on weekends when work allowed. But something had changed. Riley's visit had opened a door Dalton didn't know how to close. Every time he looked at the Shovelhead, he saw Marcus, saw Riley, saw the road stretching forward instead of just backward. Riley called twice, once to say thank you again, once to ask if Dalton had meant what he'd said about the bike. Dalton said yes, though he wasn't entirely sure he meant it. But saying yes felt important, felt like honoring something larger than his own pain. When Riley pulled up a month later, it was early Sunday morning. Dalton was already awake, already in the garage, already standing in front of the Shovelhead like a man before an altar. You ready? Riley asked. He'd walked in quiet, but Dalton had heard him coming. You always heard engines before you saw them. No, Dalton admitted, but we're doing it anyway. He'd cleaned the bike, serviced it, changed the oil and checked the brakes and tuned the carburetor until it purred. Everything Marcus would have wanted, everything Riley deserved. I've got conditions, Dalton said. Name them. You take care of it, like it's your own kid. You don't sell it, you don't let it rot in a garage like I did. You ride it, you give it the miles it's owed. And if you ever decide you're done with it, you bring it back here, to me. That's the deal. Riley extended his hand. Deal. They shook on it. Dalton grabbed the keys from where they hung on a hook by his workbench, held them for a long moment, felt the weight of metal and memory and letting go. There's something else, Dalton said. I need you to do me a favor. Anything. Take me with you, just this once. Let me write it one more time before you take it home. Let me say goodbye properly. Riley's expression softened. Of course. They both climbed on, Dalton in front, hands on the grips he'd held 10,000 times. Riley behind him, in Marcus's place, in the spot where death and life and everything between had played out across years and asphalt. Dalton kicked the engine over.
It caught immediately, that beautiful shovelhead rumble that was half music and half thunder. He eased out of the garage, into sunlight that felt almost holy. The day was clear and bright and impossibly blue, the kind of day Marcus would have loved. They rode north on the county highway. Dalton didn't think about where they were going. Just let the road lead, let the engines sing, let the wind strip away everything except the moment. Riley held on, steady and sure behind him, a good passenger, someone who understood that the bike was a shared thing, that the ride was a conversation between rider and machine and wind and world. After 20 minutes, Dalton saw the turn, saw the dirt road, saw the bridge waiting like an old wound that had finally scarred over. He took the turn without thinking, pulled up to the same spot they'd stopped a month ago, killed the engine. The silence was immediate and total. They both climbed off, stood at the edge of the bridge, looking down at the creek below. But this time it was different. This time there was no ghost, just water and stone and the memory of something carried rather than hidden. "This is where it starts for you," Dalton said. Same place it ended for him. Riley nodded. His hand went to the tank, rested there like a benediction. "I'll take care of it," Riley said. "I promise." "I know you will." They stood there for another minute, neither speaking, both understanding that some moments weren't meant to be filled with words. Then Dalton handed Riley the keys. The metal was warm from his pocket, from his hand, from 15 years of holding on too tight. "It's yours," Dalton said. Riley took them, closed his fist around them, looked at Dalton with those green eyes that were Marcus's eyes, that carried the same fire and the same fear and the same stubborn hope that maybe the road would last forever after all. "Thank you," Riley said, "for keeping him alive, for telling me the truth, for this." "Thank you for finding me," Dalton said. "I didn't know I needed it until you showed up." Riley climbed on the shovelhead, kicked it over. The engine caught, and Dalton felt something inside him settle. Something that had been restless for 15 years, finally finding peace. "Hey," Dalton called as Riley prepared to pull away. "You ever need anything, advice, parts, someone to ride with, you call me, understand?" "Understood." "And Riley?" "Yeah?" "Your dad would be proud of who you became, of what you're doing. He'd be proud." Riley's expression cracked for just a second. Then he smiled, small and sad and grateful all at once. "That means something," Riley said, "coming from you." He eased the shovelhead forward, onto the bridge, across the place where Marcus had fallen. But this time the bike made it across, made it to the other side, made it past the moment where everything had ended, toward the place where something new could begin. Dalton watched him go, watched the shovelhead disappear down the road, taking with it 15 years of grief and 1 month of grace. He stood there until the engine sound faded completely, until he was alone with the creek and the bridge, and the memory of 2 men who'd loved the machine and each other, and the road more than was probably wise. Then he walked back to his truck, climbed in, sat for a long moment with his hands on the wheel. His phone buzzed. Text from Riley. "Made it to the highway. Engine sounds perfect. Thank you." Dalton typed back. "Ride safe. Call when you get home." He started the truck, pulled away from the bridge for what he knew was the last time. Behind him, the past stayed where it belonged. In the wire, in the earth, in the space between heartbeats, where Marcus lived on in story and steel. Ahead, the road stretched out clean and clear and full of light. Dalton pointed the truck toward home and drove. 3 months passed. The garage felt empty without the shovelhead, but Dalton found he didn't mind the emptiness as much as he'd expected. He had his own bike, a newer Softail that ran smooth and didn't carry ghosts, and he had Riley, who called every week with updates. The shovelhead was running strong. He'd taken it to Colorado, to Arizona, up the coast to San Francisco. He was giving it miles, giving it life, giving it the road Marcus had died trying to reach. They planned to meet up for a ride in the spring. Riley would come down, they'd spend a weekend running the back roads, and Dalton would tell more stories. There were always more stories when you lived long enough and paid attention to the things that mattered. But in the meantime, Dalton found something else. Found himself showing up to club meetings and actually participating instead of just haunting the edges. Found himself offering to mentor some of the younger members, teaching them about engines and respect, and the difference between riding fast and riding smart. Found himself, for the first time in 15 years, believing that maybe the life wasn't all cost. Maybe there was still something worth holding on to in the brotherhood and the leather and the roads that called to men who needed calling. One Saturday in late autumn, the club organized a memorial ride. It was an annual thing. They'd ride out to honor brothers who'd passed, laying flowers at roadside markers and in cemeteries, speaking names into the wind so they wouldn't be forgotten. Dalton had skipped it the last few years. Too many names, too much weight. This year, he showed up. They gathered at dawn in the parking lot of the clubhouse. 20 bikes, 20 brothers. Some he'd known for decades, some he'd barely met, but all wearing the same patch, all there for the same reason. Hawk, the club president, came over, older than Dalton by 10 years and twice as weathered. He'd been there the night Marcus died, had helped carry the casket.
Had never mentioned it since, because sometimes the best thing you could do for a brother was let him grieve in silence. "Good to see you here," Hawk said. "Good to be here," Dalton replied, and meant it. They rode out in formation. Dalton took his place in the middle of the pack, surrounded by engine noise and exhaust and the collective will of men who'd chosen to ride together. The morning was cold and clear, the kind of day that made you grateful for leather and motion and the way your body woke up mile by mile. They stopped at 6 places, 6 markers, 6 brothers gone to accidents and cancer and time itself. At each stop, Hawk would speak a few words. Someone would pour whiskey on the ground. They'd all be silent for a minute. Then they'd mount up and ride to the next one. The last stop was Marcus's grave. Dalton had been there for the funeral, but not since. The headstone was simple. Name, dates, a carved image of a motorcycle. Nothing about the club, nothing about Riley. Just the facts of a life measured in years too few. Hawk poured the whiskey, spoke the name. The brothers stood in a circle around the grave, heads bowed, engines silent. And then Hawk looked at Dalton. "You want to say something?" Hawk asked, not a command, an offer. Dalton stepped forward, looked at the headstone, at Marcus's name carved in granite. "I met his son," Dalton said. The words came out rough. 3 months ago. Kid named Riley. Looks just like Marcus. Has his hands, his smile, his heart. And I gave him the shovel head, the one Marcus died on. Because Riley's gonna give it the life Marcus couldn't. Because some things don't end when we think they do. Because maybe all we leave behind is the stories people tell and the miles they ride in our name. Dalton paused, looked around the circle at faces worn and young, familiar and strange, all united by the same code and the same road. Marcus would have been a good father, Dalton continued. He just ran out of time.
But Riley's going to be a good man anyway, because people find a way, even when the path is hard, even when they have to figure it out alone. And maybe that's the lesson. Maybe that's what we honor when we stand here. Not perfection, just the attempt, just the trying, just the knowledge that we rode and we loved and did our best with what we had. He stopped, couldn't say more. Hawk put a hand on his shoulder. The other brothers murmured agreement. Someone poured more whiskey. They stood for another minute in silence, and in that silence, Dalton felt something release. Some final piece of grief that had been holding on, finally letting go. They rode back to the clubhouse, parked, went inside for drinks and food and the kind of easy conversation that only comes when men have ridden together and buried their dead together and know that tomorrow isn't promised, but the brotherhood is. Dalton stayed until late afternoon. Then he climbed on his Softail, pointed it toward home, and rode. The sun was setting when he pulled into his driveway, gold and red painting the sky. The house looked small and peaceful in the dying light. He was unlocking the door when he heard it, an engine, familiar, coming up the road. He turned. A shovelhead, chrome catching the last of the sun. Rider in a leather jacket, no patch, but the posture of someone who'd been riding long enough to look like they belonged on the machine. Riley pulled into the driveway, killed the engine, grinned. "Surprise," Riley said. "What are you doing here?" Dalton asked. Not angry, just surprised. Good surprised. "Thought I'd swing by on my way back from New Mexico, see how you were doing. Plus, I wanted to show you something." Riley climbed off the bike, walked around to the saddlebag, pulled out a package wrapped in brown paper. "What's this?" Dalton asked. "Open it." Dalton unwrapped the package. Inside was a jacket, leather, custom, black with silver hardware.
On the back, stitched in careful detail, was an image of a shovel head, and beneath it, in script, "In memory of Marcus," written by Riley, protected by Dalton. Dalton stared at it. His throat closed up again. Seemed like that was happening a lot lately. He looked at Riley. "Because you gave me the bike and the stories and the truth. And because I think you need to know that what you did mattered, that it still matters, that you're not just holding on to the past, you're making sure it stays alive for the future." Dalton put the jacket on. It fit perfectly, like Riley had somehow known exactly what size to make it. And when Dalton caught his reflection in the bike's chrome, he saw himself transformed. Not younger, not different, just more complete, like a piece that had been missing had finally slid into place. "Thank you," Dalton said. "Thank you," Riley replied, "for everything." They stood there in the driveway as the sun dropped below the horizon and the first stars came out. 2 men and a bike, and the ghost of a third man who lived on in chrome and memory, and the miles still to come. "You hungry?" Dalton asked. "Starving." "Come on, I'll make something. You can tell me about New Mexico. And tomorrow, if you've got time, we'll take both bikes out, show you some roads around here that Marcus used to love." "I've got time," Riley said. They went inside together. The house didn't feel so empty anymore, didn't feel so silent, because sometimes family wasn't about blood. Sometimes it was about who showed up, who listened, who rode with you into the dark, and trusted you'd find the light together. That night, over food and beer and stories that stretched into the small hours, Dalton and Riley built something new on the foundation of something old. A friendship, a legacy. A promise that the road would continue, that the names would be remembered, that the bikes would keep rolling long after the riders who loved them first had gone. And in the garage, sitting patient in the dark, the shovelhead waited for morning, for motion, for the next mile in a journey that would never truly end as long as someone was willing to turn the key and feel the engine catch and remember that riding wasn't about the destination. It was about the motion, the moment, the shared heartbeat of machine and man, and the road rising up to meet them both. They rode at dawn, Dalton on his Softail, Riley on the shovelhead, side by side through farmland and forest and the long empty stretches where the highway cut through nothing but space and sky. They didn't race, didn't show off, just rode steady and smooth, the way Marcus would have. The way men ride when they understand that speed isn't the point, being present is. At a roadside overlook, they stopped, stood at the edge of a cliff looking down at a valley green with spring growth and a river silver in the early light. "This is what he loved," Dalton said. "This exact thing. The view, the freedom, the feeling that you could ride forever and never run out of road." "I get it now," Riley said. "Why he couldn't quit, why he kept choosing this even when he knew he should choose something else. It gets in you, becomes part of how you breathe." "Yeah," Dalton agreed. "But you can love something and still walk away when you need to.
Marcus learned that too late, but you don't have to. You've got your shop, your life. This can be part of it without being all of it. Riley looked at him. Is that what you did? Walked away? Eventually, Dalton said. Took me longer than it should have, but yeah, I still ride, still wear the patch, still show up for my brothers, but it doesn't own me anymore. I own it. There's a difference. How do you know when it's time? You'll know, Dalton said. Trust yourself.
And trust that the road will be here whenever you need it. That's the thing about freedom. Real freedom. It's always available. You just have to be strong enough to choose it, instead of letting it choose you. They rode for another hour before turning back. By the time they reached Dalton's house, the sun was high and hot, and the day had settled into the easy rhythm of late morning. Riley had to leave, had work on Monday, had a life waiting in Dallas. They said goodbye in the driveway. Another handshake, another moment of connection that felt like more than it was, and exactly like what it needed to be. I'll call you next week, Riley said. I'll answer, Dalton replied. Riley climbed on the shovel head, looked at Dalton for a long moment. He'd be proud of you too, Riley said. Marcus, he'd be proud of how you carried this, how you let me in, how you're still riding, even after everything. Dalton smiled. We're all just doing our best. Yeah, but some people's best is pretty damn good. Riley kicked the engine over, gave Dalton one last nod. Then he was gone, heading down the road toward Dallas and the next chapter, and all the miles waiting to be written. Dalton stood in his driveway until the sound faded, until all that was left was the wind in the trees and the sun on his shoulders, and the weight of the new jacket that felt like armor and blessing both. He went inside, made coffee, sat at his kitchen table where he'd sat 1,000 times before. But this time, something was different. This time, the silence wasn't heavy. It was just silence, clean and clear, and full of possibility. His phone buzzed. Text from Riley. Made it to the highway, thinking about that ride we did yesterday. Best morning I've had in years. Dalton typed back. Same. Come back soon. Lots more roads to show you. He sent the text, put the phone down, looked out the window at his Softail parked in the driveway, chrome gleaming, ready for the next ride.
Tomorrow he'd go to work, would wrench on someone else's bike and tell stories with the other mechanics, and collect his paycheck and go home to this small house that had witnessed 15 years of silence and 1 season of healing. But today, right now, in this moment, he was just a man who'd done his best, who'd held on to something broken until someone came along who knew how to make it whole again, who'd ridden through grief and come out the other side still capable of joy. And that, Dalton thought, was enough. That was more than enough. That was everything. The road stretched on, endless and waiting. Behind him, the past settled into story. Ahead, the future gleamed like chrome in sunlight. And between them, the present moment held everything that mattered. A bike, a brother, a second chance. The ride, after all, was never really over. It just changed direction. And if you were lucky, if you were brave enough and broken enough and willing enough to let go and hold on at the same time, it carried you home.